Hello, my name is Sheena and I'm creating this video to talk about how I healed my chronic foot injury using the power of my mind. I've been wanting to make this video for so long. I've been wanting to write an essay or write a book about this just because it's so huge and I think it could really help a lot of people. And I just want to share my personal story around it. But I've struggled so much with perfectionism around it, feeling like I don't have my thoughts perfectly together to the point where it won't be accepted, or that like I'm not saying it in exactly the right way, or it's not the right time, and really just focusing so much on having it be so perfect. And right now this is just an exercise in accepting that like this video is not going to be perfect. I'm probably going to forget some things, miss some things, but if I wait forever, it's just never going to get out there in the world and I'm never going to do this. So yeah, that's just my disclaimer, and just sharing that like this I think is a really important and meaningful thing to me, and I think it's important to just share it with the world. So I had a foot injury that started when I started getting foot pain when I was working a job where I was walking a lot. It was a really shitty job. I was like going door to door selling things basically, and I was walking multiple miles a day. And in retrospect, like now that doesn't even sound that bad, but at the time, like it really put a strain on my body. And you know, there are other factors that now I know are also putting a strain on my body, like just the stress I was feeling, the time in my life and what I was going through, the fact that I hated that job, the fact that probably my shoes were too small for my feet at the time because I have really narrow feet, and so I was always trying to cram them into smaller shoes. So many different factors, like emotional, physical, stress, on top of the actual effort that I was putting into the job. But my feet started hurting, and I would wake up every morning and my feet would feel like these stones, like these slabs of meat that just like couldn't move and couldn't bend, and they were so stiff and it was so uncomfortable. And I would just, you know, put my shoes on and get back to work and or carry on with my day. And after I left that job, I started to wear like, you know, experiment with different shoes that would hopefully be more comfortable for my feet. And then I was working a job where I was just sitting down, so I didn't have to walk as much, but I still had so much foot pain. I would still wake up every morning with this tension and this pain in my feet, and the pain was more and more localized in specific areas. And I went like around 6 months just trying to figure it out on my own before I saw a doctor. And when I saw this doctor, you know, I saw a podiatrist, and he did the regular thing where he offered me orthotics, which is the typical suggestion for anybody with foot pain is like, if you go to a podiatrist, they're probably gonna offer orthotics. If you have flat feet, which I have, especially my left foot that was having the pain is particularly flat, they're gonna offer orthotics to readjust the alignment of your feet. And I think even if you have arches, they're gonna offer you orthotics to support that part of your foot. And so it was really strange because it was almost like I'd been dealing with this for like 6-7 months at this point, but it was almost after I started to go to the doctor, it started to get worse. And I was wearing the orthotics, I was wearing the fancy ugly sneakers that they told me to wear, and I'm doing all the things, and it just feels like it's getting even worse. At this time, my job was also really, really shitty, and I hated it. it was a different job, but it was like soul sucking job in front of a computer. And I ended up doing my own research, like what's going on with my foot? Why does it hurt? And I found sesamoiditis, which basically is localized pain in the sesamoid bone of the big toe. And so I asked my doctor, and I was like, is this what I'm experiencing? Because that's where I was feeling most of the pain at this time, was in that bone of the big toe. And it was so bad that like I couldn't even put pressure on the ball, like natural pressure on the ball of my foot. And so I started researching a bunch of different strategies for this, working with my doctor about it. He gave me an MRI. Based on the MRI, he suggested that I had inflammation of that bone. And so he was like, okay, we got to get you in a boot to rest that bone. And so I got in the boot, and I was in the boot for like 2 weeks. But then when I got out of the boot, it still hurt. And I was so frustrated at this point, because I'm like, here I am seeing doctors about this. I'm doing everything, and it's just getting worse. And at this time, I started like researching online even more for solutions. I found so many other people who were dealing with the same problem. And that's another reason why I think it's important for me to get this video out there, because there's so many people on the internet for anything, any illness, looking for solutions. And finding other people within who are within that realm where they're suffering from the same problems. But this was a really dark place, because I'm seeing all these people that are dealing with the same thing, and they're suffering so much. And I'm reading about their stories and what they're suffering from, and like how their lives have changed as a result. And I'm not seeing any hope. I'm not seeing any solutions out there. And some people are offering different solutions, but then when I try them, it doesn't work. And so things like ice baths, or one person was like, oh, I just didn't put any weight on my foot for like a month, which I then tried by using crutches. So I'm like treating myself, which now I know is a terrible idea, because then your muscles atrophy. But then I was also, as a result of that, I was doing like all the foot exercises, the contrast baths, like all these solutions that are out there that people share, and nothing was helping. I found one doctor who talked about how he cured his sesamoiditis. This was a podiatrist actually who had sesamoiditis, and he cured his with barefoot running. So I even went out and I bought, I ditched the orthotics and everything, and I got the barefoot shoes that he had. And I tried practicing in those, strengthening my feet barefoot, like running in place. My dad got me like some really flexible shoes where you can like bend the soles in line with like the barefoot methodology of having, which is if you have a flexible sole, then that allows the muscles and the joints of your feet to move more fluidly the way they were designed to move, and allows you to strengthen your feet up. So I completely was on board with this. I'm still on board with this. But it didn't solve my foot problems at the time. I'm doing all the things, and of all the stuff that I was introduced to, is definitely the barefoot stuff that resonated with me the most, because I'm like, I don't want to live my life wearing orthotics and wearing ugly ass shoes. Excuse my language, but it's true. And not that barefoot shoes are any better if you look them up, but they have come a long way. But I want to have that freedom, I want to be able to be free. And when I was a kid, I would always run around barefoot, and it was one of the best feelings I ever had. And so that was a goal of mine after experiencing this whole process with my foot. And anyway, so I did all these things, and started to improve a little bit, but then it would get bad again, and then it would improve a little, and then it would get bad again. And I ended up going on a trip. And at that time, my foot pain was like the best it had been in like a year and a half. It still bothered me, but it was the best it had been. And I wasn't quite able to wear the barefoot shoes all the way. I wasn't quite fully comfortable in them. So I would still have some support, but no matter what I was wearing, I didn't feel pain-free and I didn't feel totally comfortable. I was just kind of like doing the best that I could to get through. And I ended up going on a trip, and then while I was on that trip, something shifted, something happened, and I can't totally pinpoint it what it was now, but at the time I thought it was because I'd gone out dancing one night for like a whole night, and then after that the pain started to get worse and worse and worse in that same area, the sesamoid area, specifically like the tendon that links the toe to the ball of the foot joint. That area was just, it just kept getting worse. And so I thought it was that night because I went out dancing or whatever. But at the time I was just like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, I don't want to deal with my foot pain anymore. And so I just kind of like ignored it. I sort of just like pushed it off and kept like doing what I wanted to do, which was traveling at the time. And I stopped doing anything strenuous. Like I stopped going out dancing. I stopped hiking, all these things that I thought were like aggravating it even more. And so, it got so bad to the point where like I even reached out to my parents to send me those ugly orthotic shoes that I didn't want to wear anymore, because even though the wearing those shoes never seemed to like fully heal, it did create the support where the weight would come off of that part of my body to a certain extent. So it also was more of a comfort in my mind because it was a more like mainstream accepted way to deal with this thing. So it felt more comfortable for me to do that. So I started wearing these ugly orthotic shoes, and eventually I came back from my travels. And also, like, no shame to anybody who wears those shoes, like, no judgment. Anyway, moving on. So then I came home, and it was the same thing where it came in waves, where it would get really bad and then it would get better a little bit, but never fully better. And then it would get bad and then it would get better, but never fully better. And then that kept happening until I spoke with a friend, and she was like, why don't you just like, because it was consuming my life. I felt like I just couldn't, I felt so restricted with all the things I wanted to do. I was working a job when I got back where I had to be on my feet, and that was terrible, because then every day without fail I would come home and my feet would be so swollen. The next morning they'd be like tingly and tense and in pain. The whole foot, because now I know like I was compensating a lot from that one area that felt a lot of pain, but then I was creating so much pain in other parts of my body. And it was just terrible. And so my friend made this suggestion that like, why don't I just like fully devote myself to just healing my foot? Like, quit that job and just devote myself to that purpose. And, I was like, you know what? That feels like the one thing I haven't tried yet. And at the time, my dad had just passed away. And so I was living with my mom. And so I had the like option to just stay at home and not work, which is an option that's like not available to everybody. So I was very fortunate in the fact that like I could just be like, no, I'm just gonna focus on this one thing. and heal this one thing. And I put all of my energy into it. And I think at the time I started seeing a physical therapist. My daily like routine was taking care of my like, at certain times of the day I would do special things for my foot. Like in the morning I would do the contrast baths, and I would do like the foot exercises. And then I also just didn't do anything during this time, but my focus and my routine was around healing my foot. I started eating differently. I started eating special food because I thought like, wow, maybe my body just like can't heal on its own. I need to eat like really healthy, and then that will allow my body to heal on its own. And I started following all these different diet trends that I saw online. I did like the Candida diet. I did paleo. And then one friend suggested, because at this point, like I couldn't comfortably walk. I was limiting the amount of steps I was taking a day, because I knew even if I was walking and I happened to be pain-free for like a moment, then the pain would come back later. And at this point, the pain was like I would wake up in the middle of the night with the pain, or like I would be walking and I would step the wrong way and I would get sharp pain. And like looking back on it now, like it was so debilitating. Like it was painful and it was so uncomfortable. And I felt terrible. It felt like I was like 26 and I felt like I was 70 years old because I just could not walk comfortably. And so, or without pain. And so, I ended up seeing this doctor who was like an alternative doctor, and he said that probably it's because my gut biome is off, that it's like releasing something into my body that's, I don't remember exactly, that either was like not allowing my body to heal, but he seemed so confident that like if I just take these certain supplements, do this diet plan, then like my body would heal itself. And so I started doing that. So I became very, very rigid with like my food, with my like daily routine, with my life. Everything I was doing, I was checking to see like how impactful it would be to my foot. And it was terrible this time in my life. It was so terrible because I just felt so completely consumed by this thing that I couldn't fix. And I was so depressed and I was so miserable, and I just wanted to live my life again. Like I wanted to play tennis. I wanted to go for hikes. I wanted to go dancing without like worrying about my foot. But all of these things would make my foot hurt after. And so, or during. And so like, it was a really hard time. And oh my God, at this point, the shoes I was wearing were so ugly. Like I was wearing, they were Ultra brand, which I really love, but I was using the like super thick cushioned ones that were like neon green, which didn't match any of my clothes. But this was the only thing that I could get to wear where I felt like I could just relax a little bit, where I felt like my foot had the cushion, but it also had the wide toe box, and it didn't have a heel. So it was like barefoot shoe methodology, but with a lot of cushion. So, I mean, just talking about this right now, you can tell like how obsessive I got about this thing. It was crazy. And I think that's like my personality as well, is that like I get really obsessive about things. I have OCD, and so this can come out with other stuff. But I think this is like important awareness, like even if you don't have OCD, and if you are someone who might have anxiety or a lot of like someone who wants to have a lot of control in their life, which is a part of OCD, right? It's like if you have OCD, you want to create control in your life. And then the compulsions are what makes OCD. But I won't go into that right now. Anyway, but I was just like totally obsessing with this thing, and like my whole life revolved around this thing. So, anyway, that same doctor who like prescribed all those supplements for me, which were like honestly disgusting, but at the time felt like, okay, this is really healthy, right? Like okay, there's all this research about this one supplement, like this must be really good for my body, which, not trying to dismiss that either, but the mentality that I was in was like, I'm doing everything to make my body healthy. And what I didn't realize was that was exactly the effort and the intention and the obsession that was keeping me in this state. And so that is where I want to go into in this next section. So basically, once I, that's where I was at that point. And I felt, I was so skinny. I had lost so much weight. I didn't feel like strong in my body. And my foot still hurt and was perhaps the worst it had been. Like in some ways it was better, in a lot of ways it wasn't better. And so that same doctor that offered me all those supplements, he ended up suggesting for me a THC tincture to take for period cramps, because I get really bad period cramps. And so he was like, yeah, take this tincture. So I take this marijuana or cannabis tincture, whatever you want to call it, and I get really, really high from that. And I've smoked weed before. I've taken tinctures before. I've taken edibles before. I've gotten really crazy high before. But this, like, whatever state of mind I was in that moment to allow for that high state allowed me to really tune in with my body in a way that my mind couldn't interfere. So I noticed that at this time, what I think happens sometimes when people smoke weed or are high on THC or whatever, is that the mental or the language part of the brain can't function as optimally as it does normally. And so in a lot of ways, it feels like it shuts down, it shuts off. And so I have thoughts. Even though I have thoughts, though, they are not as coherent. I got into a state where I was very in tune with like the felt sense of my body. And I noticed that I was constricting and holding my body like in this, like when you're scared or you're stressed and you're just like constricting like this and creating this tension, I could feel that in my entire body. And when I tried to understand it, as often happens when I'm in a regular sober state, is for myself personally, I'm often trying to understand. I'm often trying to figure out what it is that I'm feeling. And so I found myself not able to do that because the language part of my brain just wasn't operating, and I really wanted to understand. But instead, I was remaining very tuned in with that constricted feeling. And it was crazy because I could really feel it in my body, and I could really feel it in my foot, both feet, actually, and my legs going up to my knees. And at the time, I had actually started to have knee pain as well. So I wasn't just having foot pain, I was also having knee pain. And especially my left knee, because a year prior, I had had a bike accident where I had hit a curb and I'd flown and I'd hit my knee against the curb. So I probably had something going on there that was still healing. But I could feel that tension constricting all the way up my legs. And when I noticed that tension, I could tell that I was holding that with my mind, that my mind from a fear state and as a protective response was bracing, was tensing as a way to protect my body. But I all of a sudden had this beautiful vision of my foot, as if you can imagine like my fingernail here as the original point of the injury. I had this vision that that was fine, that was healed, that was totally okay. But around that area was like a radius of tension that maybe developed like a week after. And then around that area was another radius of tension that maybe developed 2 weeks later. And then that kept building and building until the tension kept building on top of itself to the point where it was traveling up my body. And all of this tension was happening purely from a mental state where my mind unconsciously, this was not a conscious thing, or maybe it initially was conscious, like, oh, I want to protect that part of myself, right? I mean, that part was conscious. But unconsciously, what was happening was that I was checking that part of my body to see how I felt and to check that it was okay and that it was protected and that there was nothing wrong with me. And that checking and that act, that mental act of looking and wanting to protect was creating this tension for myself, was creating this constriction. And it was so beautiful because in that moment, it was like I knew that all I had to do was release that tension. And what I did was I stood on one side of my room and I walked to the other side of my room without holding that tension. And I say this knowing that this is not an easy thing to do. I was very lucky in that moment, or I don't know if I want to say lucky, but I was in a very fortunate place because I was so tuned in with that tension that I knew I could just let it go. And I did that. And I was like, wait, I don't feel any pain. And I walked again from one side of the room to the other side of the room, and I just let that tension fall. I let the weight of my body sit in my feet in a way that I hadn't done in a really long time because I was always bracing. And I just let the gravity, the weight of my body sit in my feet, and I just walked another time from one side of the room to the other. And I didn't have any pain. And it was like this light bulb moment that went off where I realized that this is it. This is it. This is the only thing that's holding me back right now, is this unconscious psychological tension that I'm experiencing. And it was so beautiful. I did my best to like write it out so that I could like remember when I wasn't high anymore, because that experience of shutting off the thinking part of my brain, or it wasn't shut off, it was still there. It just wasn't, it was moving slower. And that allowed me to really tune in with my body in that way. And it was so cool. But unsurprisingly, as soon as I wasn't high anymore, that connection was gone. And I couldn't feel it anymore because now I was back in my regular state where my mind wants to control things. And so I witnessed that, I experienced that, but I remembered that feeling from before. And so this is where I think it's really interesting when people talk about faith in general, because I had to have faith that that was the case and trust it, even though I no longer was physically experiencing that. But because of that experience, because I was truly fortunate to have had that experience, I genuinely believed that I was creating that tension, that energetic and physical tension in my body that was causing the pain. And so during this time, I had a series of strategies to support myself in releasing that tension. Because when you tell someone to relax, oftentimes there's an effort there to relax that prevents relaxation. And so just telling myself to relax was not a solution, or like to relax the tension was not a solution, because I'm putting my attention and my effort again on that part of my body. And so it's very counterintuitive. And so I noticed this. I noticed that my body wasn't able to have that relaxation response that I was able to have in that moment when I was high. And even later, if I got high, I wasn't able to access that in the same way, because it was like a conscious thing now. It was like an effortful thing. So it was very fortunate that I was able to have that one experience. But just awareness of this fact can be, or this power of the mind can be so incredibly helpful. And so I wanted to also share for this next section the strategies that I utilized for myself that helped me release that tension naturally and without force. Hello. Okay, so it's the next day. I had to take a little break. And I'm totally ready to dive in and talk about the different strategies that I utilized when I had this experience to help myself release that tension and in turn release that pain as well. And so it took me about 6 months, maybe less, until I was pain-free. And I was able to do the things that I regularly like to do, like dancing, hiking, going for long walks, that sort of thing. So I have compiled so many different lists to try and organize exactly all the different things that I did. And it's a very abstract thing. So it's kind of hard for me to like concretize in a way, or create a very like cohesive list. And so it is possible, but many of these different things like merge together. And I'm going to do my best to just present these concepts to you so that it's clear to the best of my ability. But I think it's just important to mention that like the way these things land for each person might be a little different. And so my specific way of doing it might not be the best way for everybody, but this is what I found to be so incredibly helpful for me, and I really believe it could help a lot of people. So the first thing that I did was I became aware of the tension that was there, and I was aware that that tension was existing as a consequence of my mind focusing and fixating on that part of my body, and creating a sort of mental, physical, and energetic tension in my foot and spreading throughout my body. So I was aware of this, and like I said before, just telling myself to relax wasn't the solution, because that could be a very effortful thing as well. And looking back, there were actually times where I would tell myself to relax. And what's interesting is it was this kind of like weird paradox, because yes, when we tell ourselves to relax, sometimes just setting that intention for ourselves can allow our bodies to soften in different ways. And sometimes when we tell ourselves to relax, it can be forceful. And so the way we do it to ourselves can be very different. And so what I found is that when I was telling myself to relax, even though I was saying that, I was also aware of the fact that my body was holding this tension, and that was okay. There were moments where I genuinely desired to relax and like relax my muscles. and I could just feel my body tensing up even more. And so I learned that in order for my body to truly relax, in order for my muscles to truly soften and be in this comfortable, relaxed state where they weren't trying to hold on and protect so much, I had to just let that part of my body be exactly the way it was. And this was a huge dramatic difference from before, because previously I would feel the pain. I wasn't aware of the tension. I was aware of muscle tension causing pain. So I did a lot of like massages. That's another thing that I did. I did a lot of self-massage to like release that physical tension, which I think is a really important point that I forgot to bring up earlier, is that like that's another big thing in health or injury, is like the tension in like our fascia and our muscles that exists separate from the mind, or it's all related, but it's different. It's not where like the mind is like causing a constant activation, which is what I was doing. And that's what the tension was that I was experiencing. So I had this awareness that the tension was there, and I wasn't going to do anything about it. I was going to just allow it to be there, because deep down I knew and I believed that I was fine, that tension is there and it's creating this pain, but all of that is just an experience. Deep down I'm fine. Like deep down, my bones, my muscles, they were all healthy, and they wanted to be healthy, and they wanted to thrive. And so just knowing this fact allowed me to trust in my own body, and prevented me from going online, researching things, coming up with better plans for myself, blaming myself for whatever mistakes I made, trying to figure out, well, why is it hurting today, but it wasn't hurting yesterday? Little things like this. So I wasn't engaged in those mental processes, because I knew and I believed that not only were they not helpful, but they were interfering with my body's natural process. They were interfering by creating more of that energetic and physical tension simply by keeping my mind focused on my body and constantly checking to see, am I okay? Consciously and unconsciously checking. And so that checking act was another thing that I noticed I was doing that was keeping my mind focused. And so my awareness in how involved my mind was involved in my healing process was huge at this time. My awareness of how my mind is interfering with my healing process, and also my trust in my body to be fine just the way it is. And that was really beautiful, because I knew that whatever was going on up here, whatever was going on in my body, deep down there was nothing wrong with me. And I feel like so much of the issues that plague humanity are that we believe there's something wrong. And we have that belief, we don't accept ourselves where we're at, and we have a fear around that. And then the mind wants to go in and control. But the mind can only focus on a couple things at a time. The body is doing a million things at once. The body wants to thrive on its own, and we don't always let it. And this awareness to me was so strong that even in those moments where I would freak out and I'd be like, oh my God, my foot, I did this thing and now my foot's hurting so badly. Let me try and research another like solution out there on the internet, or let me find, figure out like, where's the pain coming from? Oh, maybe if I do this, all those different thought processes that can happen. That still happened for me. And when that would happen, I would catch myself. And that's the key, because now this is years later, and I still practice these strategies, but it's not always easy to catch myself when it happens. And at that time, it was so vivid for me what was happening that I could catch myself. And there were a few things that I would do. I reminded myself, I knew that if I research this thing right now, that's not actually going to help me. If I analyze this, it's not actually going to help me. And so my pursuit was allowing myself to be where I was at, accepting the tension that was existing, allowing the tension to be there instead of like trying to push it away, and shifting my focus. So instead of focusing so much on this stuff happening, a couple things that I would do is I would have certain mantras for myself. For example, I am radiant was a mantra that I would say to myself, or I am strong was a mantra. I am already healthy. I am already healed. My foot is already healed. And I would repeat these in my head. And those other thoughts, those other negative thoughts would still exist of like, what if this is really serious? How could you have gone on that hike yesterday? You've ruined everything. You know, like all those negative thoughts that come through and negative feelings that come through of like blame, judgment, shame, criticism, were still there. They were just, you know, they kind of would just float. And then in my consciousness, I would say to myself, I am strong. I am radiant. I am already healed. And even if I didn't really believe it in that moment, I still carried through with it to the point where I just carried on with my life. That's the other thing, is I would seek out things that were genuinely fun and joyful for me. I had completely lost connection with what was actually like fun and nourishing for me, because I was so rigid with my routines and everything, because I had my whole life revolved around my foot. And so because I lost connection with those things, I had to reconnect with it. And every time I did that, like, I don't know, whatever it is for you, like maybe it's listening to music or watching a good show, or maybe it's like eating something you really enjoy, or playing with your pet, or hanging out with a friend, or going to the beach, like whatever these joyful things are for you, those were the healing moments for me. Because even though I would still have those worries in the back of my mind, eventually this part of my focus would shift over to what it is that I was doing that was so joyful. Okay, so what was really cool about the experience that I had when I was high is that I had this very deep sense of knowing and belief in the health of my body, the radiance of my body, the fact that I had created this with my mind. But what was really awesome was that a friend had told me about a book where there was an actual doctor out there talking about this. You know, it wasn't just me, it was a professional. And so I have this book here. It's called Healing Back Pain by Dr. Sarno, and I will include a link below that is a video that 60 Minutes, I think, or maybe it was 2020. One of those did a video on him, because he was curing people's chronic back pain that they'd had for years, that they'd had surgeries on, that were completely debilitating in their lives. And he was curing them just by giving these lectures. And his strategy, and this is where I really believe, like, there's different strategies that all lead to the same thing. His strategy and his belief was that people who were suffering with this were often people who were always trying to be good, always trying to be nice, always, you know, putting on a happy face, didn't want to upset anyone, didn't want to ruffle any feathers. These were people with very extreme suppressed anger, or not even extreme suppressed anger, but just suppressed anger. And so his strategy was to help these people release their anger. And this completely described me, because I was always somebody, I still am like this, like I still struggle with this, but this was something that was so much worse at the time, where I didn't allow myself to really get angry about things. And I had a lot of things to be angry about. And it wasn't, it's interesting because, like, when you're repressing emotions, it's often you don't realize, because what you're doing is you're numbing the emotion in your body. It's not always just like a forceful act. And so it's hard sometimes to realize if you're repressing something. And so during this time, every time I felt that pain in my foot, I would think about, well, what am I frustrated about right now? What am I angry about right now? And his theory and his belief is that when we repress our anger, our mind strategizes to avoid having to think about that really painful emotional thing. As a way to avoid feeling the emotional pain, the body creates a different alarm system that then pulls our attention to the thing instead of whatever else is going on within us. So he says that's very common for people if they have, like, maybe they have something in their body that's like not perfectly anatomically correct. Like maybe you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, this is like this, but it's supposed to be like this. And he was getting a lot of people with these diagnoses that said there was something wrong with their body, but in his opinion, like, they should not be experiencing the level of pain that they were having. And so he believes that the mind basically like deposits that focus onto a part of the body that might already be prone to having something going on or some kind of pain or issue, and it creates tension there. He calls it tension mitosis, tension something, TMS for sure, but tension mitosis or something like that, syndrome. And that tension is created in that part of the body as a very effective strategy to keep the mind off of whatever the thing is that makes them frustrated, angry, sad, whatever it is. And so during this time, every time my foot hurt, I'd be like, well, what am I angry about? And I would journal about something that frustrated me, or I would just think about the thing that frustrated me. And that would eventually, similar to doing the joyful things, that would also shift my focus. And then all of a sudden I'd realize, like, oh wait, my foot doesn't hurt, or like, oh, I'm not experiencing any pain right now, or I just forget about my foot completely and move on with my life. And then it's like a couple hours later, I'm like, oh wait, what? I guess I'm okay now, right? So that was another strategy I used to shift my focus and shift my mind. And yeah, for me, that was really effective. I did the pendulum did swing the other way quite a lot. So I did go through a period where I was very angry about a lot of things. And then, I think I needed to experience that to a point where then the pendulum can like swing back to like a healthy, more neutral place. But that was very effective and another very amazing strategy. Okay, what else do I have in my list? It's so many, like, oh yeah, okay. So the other thing that was very helpful for me, and this ties back to what I was saying initially around how I felt with the tension that I knew was there and that I was just accepting and allowing it to be there, and I wasn't trying to force it away. I also was facing my fear of what I was afraid would happen if my foot never healed. I was terrified of just like being handicapped, or I had such a terrible self-image at this time. Like, if you had seen me, you would have been like, oh, like, she looks great, right? I got really skinny. I, looked really fit. But deep down, I felt like deeply that like something's not right, that there's something wrong with me. I didn't have a great vision for my future or for my life, because what was I going to do if I was always having to limit the things that I wanted to do because of my foot? Like, what kind of jobs can I do if I'm not going to be on my foot? Like, I was basically in a very handicapped state. I don't know what the actual definition of handicapped is, but that was my fear, is that I was going to be just like totally handicapped and just kind of like this withering body. And I was like in my mid 20s. So you can imagine like how depressing that was. And so that was my self-image of myself. I just felt like my body had failed me. I felt like I was pathetic. I didn't feel strong or radiant or all those things. And so that's why I needed to remind myself of that, because it really was this belief and this fear in myself that was holding me back. And so I had to face that fear in the way that I needed to like accept that this is a possible reality. My foot could maybe never heal and never be completely normal at that point. And I wonder if maybe deep down, like, I didn't believe that anymore because of my experience where I saw that it was all the tension. And so, hence why I would tell myself also, like, I'm already healed. There's nothing wrong with me. But at the same time, there were moments of despair, even within all that. There were moments where I would forget that experience that I had previously, that awareness that I had. There were moments where I questioned all of it. And that's why I think it's so important, the faith aspect with it, because even though I questioned it, I had to have faith in that possible reality that I was fine, that there was nothing wrong. But in order to really accept that, I needed to also accept the alternative, that maybe I'm wrong, that maybe everything's gonna go to shit. And it was so important for me to accept that and face that fear, because it was my fear around that was causing my mind to get so involved in wanting to control the situation. And so it's not an easy thing to accept. And I think it's something that like my mind will never truly accept. And I could go into like the ego and what the ego wants and how it can manipulate the mind and all of that, but I'm not going to do that in this video. But it's a practice of just observing what you're afraid of and letting your body feel that feeling without getting caught up in the thought processes. And this isn't always an easy thing to do. It's something that it's a great thing to do with a therapist, like an exposure, it's called ERP. I forget what it stands for, exposure response prevention or something. I'll have to look that up. I should know this because years later I actually did this therapy for OCD and it was very effective. But if it's something that you don't feel comfortable doing on your own, like you should definitely seek out a therapist, because it can bring up a lot of really intense emotions around this thing that you might fear. But for me, accepting that fear was or allowing myself to feel that fear without controlling it was a huge part of my healing process. And this is something that I still struggle with to this day, because there's so many things in my life that I just want to control. And it's easy for the mind to get wrapped up in that, and it's hard to just face and accept what it is that like you're afraid of. And you don't have to accept it in the sense that like this is okay, but you just have to accept that it's a reality. You can still feel any kind of way about it, like anger, sadness, frustration. It's not about like forcing those emotions to feel positive about something. It's more about just like facing it and sitting with what that brings up for you, as allowing that to sit with you, as opposed to then engaging in the mental processes to control the situation that are exactly what interferes with the process to begin with. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. One other thing that I would do is if I started to feel pain, hang on, I'm gonna shift a little for the light. One other thing that I would do if I felt pain, because the interesting thing is, and Dr. Sarno also talks about this in his book, is that it's really common that like once you start to stop getting pain in one part of your body, for another part of your body to start having pain. And that happened to me. It started traveling all over my foot. It came up to my leg. Sometimes I go like weeks without anything, and then all of a sudden I would get like pain in my shoulder, right? And so the pain moved around and traveled a lot. And so I started doing this thing, which like, I just want to preface, like, I'm not a doctor. And I often feel like nervous bringing this up because it's really not to like dismiss anyone's, like, I could see how this might feel like a dangerous thing to suggest to people. But it was like maybe one of the most helpful things for me is that when I would feel pain, I would tell myself that it was an illusion, that the pain was just like fake. That like it was just there, you know, it was an illusion. It was just in my mind. There wasn't actually a problem. And that allowed me to continue to move through my life without getting sucked back into it. And for myself, like even since then, like I've had injuries where I'm like, okay, I know this is like an actual injury. This isn't just something in my mind, you know, like I tore part of my Achilles. Like if you break your arm, it's not like all just an illusion. So with something like that, I would still employ these strategies for myself because I knew that even though this was something that actually had to go through the healing process, I knew that I was prone to creating more tension over the actual injury for compensating. And so I would still apply these same strategies, even with something like that, as a way to further the healing process of my body, because I knew that I had the tendency to fixate on it. And that's helped me with other injuries. Am I missing anything? I'm probably missing something. Okay, one other thing that I wanted to add that I forgot to add later or in the video was that I just let myself be free. I had put so many rigid guidelines on myself in what I ate, what my routine was, all specifically just to be healthy. I felt like if I did everything just right, if I ate just the right foods, then I would finally be healthy. My body would reach this like optimal state of healthiness and immune function. And at that point, I would just be healthy. And I released all of that, because all of that was keeping my mind and my attention focused within this very rigid mindset of how I could be, of how I should be. And that in and of itself is what was harming me the most. And that's what was keeping me from just relaxing, from allowing my muscles to release the tension in my foot and my legs and the rest of my body, so that I could just live freely and allow my body to do what it does best, which is live and thrive. And so when I really took those rigid guidelines off of myself, specifically around food, because I think that's where it was the easiest to be the most controlling with. I could plan out what I was going to eat. I could think about it. I could control that part of myself. And this is something that is very big in the wellness industry right now. And I don't think it's become mainstream enough to see like the real impacts around this, because it's a very energetic and a very psychological thing. And that's not a very easy thing to measure. It's very easy to measure the effects or the chemicals in a substance that you might consume. It's not easy to measure the relationship that you might have with that thing that you're consuming, or with your lifestyle as a result of either consuming or not consuming, like restricting what you're eating. And so allowing myself to just listen to my body and eat what I felt like was a huge shift in just how I carried myself in my life in general. And that played a huge part in releasing this tension from my foot. Yeah. And I'm going to have another video on this, because this also affected other factors of my health, my digestion, when I shifted my relationship with food. I just wanted to add that. I think that's a very important element that I can't miss out. So I can't believe I forgot that. Okay. Oh my goodness. Look at that face. Look at that little dirt. I think that's everything. What do you think? Okay, there's another one that I forgot to include, and that was where I practiced thanking myself for the pain and thanking myself for the injury, including the initial injury and the tension that I accumulated afterwards. And so the reason why I did that was because it changed my relationship to the experience. When I wasn't doing that, I was experiencing resistance when I would feel the pain, and that would contribute to that tensing, to that contraction around that part of my body. And now, and this is something that I continuously need to remind myself to practice, because even now, like if I have something going on in my body that is painful physically or emotionally, there is an automatic instinctual response that I have that is an aversion to that feeling, to that pain. And so that's what I was experiencing. And when I create that aversion, it's like this pushing away feeling. It's this resistance feeling that is not allowing that process to move through my body. It's stagnating it. And so simply just thanking myself, thanking the pain, even though that might feel really hard to do, because you might think about all these miserable things that happened as a result, or like how you might be feeling as a result, or just the pain itself does not feel good. Like you might not instinctually feel thankful for it. But if there's some way that you can see how even this painful experience is serving you or is serving your body, to have gratitude for not just the positive things that we experience, but also the negative things that we experience, can energetically and physically completely change the response that we have. And it was my response to that was causing myself to create more tension. That doesn't mean that you're forcing yourself also to feel positive or happy. It's not about like repressing whatever anger you're feeling, because like I said before, it's important to make sure that you express your anger, even if that is also your anger around the injury and how you feel about the injury. But it is possible to feel angry and also grateful. And it's a challenge, but it was really helpful for me to learn how to balance those two emotions. So I hope that helps. Now, before I go and summarize this whole thing, I wanted to just offer the idea of imagining or envisioning a version of you that is perfectly healthy right now, that doesn't have any of these issues, that doesn't have this injury, that is able to live their life freely and to do what it is that you want to do, or don't do what it is that you don't want to do. Someone who is able to fulfill all their hopes and dreams and live a life in balance and harmony and peace and just thriving and being grounded and stable in a world filled with health and vitality. And just imagine this in your mind and what this would feel like for you in your body, what it would look like. What would this vision be? And just imagine that and ask yourself, what if this already exists right now? What if this actually was my reality right now? And I just didn't know it. Instead, I was clouded with all these other beliefs. What if this is real right now? What if this is me and who I am, and I already exist as this, and I can access this at any point? What if? Just entertain that vision for yourself and ask yourself, what if? And what if this is not your reality? What if your reality is to live a life that consists of exactly what it is that you're afraid of, the opposing vision to what it is that I just suggested you imagine? What if that is your reality right now? And what if that's never going to change? Can you take a step back and look at the value in that life as well? Because there is still value in it. And we can't deny that on this planet there are many, many people who are suffering. There are many people that have had painful things happen to them, happen to their bodies. And we cannot say for a single second that those lives do not have value, because they do. And your life also has value, even if it's this thing that you're afraid of existing or happening within you. And so can we all, because this is a process I'm also going through, can we all take a step back and see both those lives as equally valuable and worthy? Because they are. And while doing that, while accepting this possible vision of what you might fear for your life as a possible reality, can you also go back to envisioning what it is that you want, that radiant, thriving, already healed part of yourself, and just ask yourself, what if it's already there? It's already there. right, that's it. Let me know if you have any thoughts, if you want to share anything, what you think. This is my first like rambling video. I'm sure I'll have more rambling videos. This one was quite rambly. Let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know how things came across, because I'm doing my best to communicate this as clearly as possible. And I hope that if it landed for one person, I will be so happy. If you made it to the end of this video, very impressive, I have to say. And thank you so much for watching. So, all right, goodbye.